A key promise the Lord had made the children of Israel was that if you walk in my ways, you will not suffer the diseases of Egypt. And so now in Leviticus chapter 11, we have some of the requirements given to the children of Israel that they might classify the clean and the unclean, and so keep themselves clean, and so keep themselves healthy. A large responsibility that the priests had would be to teach and to demonstrate these requirements, that the Lord might fulfill his promise to them. For the largest contributor to our health is the food that we eat. Leviticus chapter 11. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whoever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The rock hyrax, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The hare, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. And the swine, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch, they are unclean to you. These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination, the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite and the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, and the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, and the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron, after its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those that have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. These you may eat, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, and the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we've shared together the first part of Leviticus chapter 11. One of the key responsibilities of Aaron and his sons as priests was to teach the children of Israel to distinguish between the holy and the unholy, and between the unclean and the clean. And so in terms of what they might eat, of animals, of birds, of fish and of insects, clear guidelines are given so that the children of Israel can distinguish. No explanation is given as to why certain animals and birds and insects are permitted and others are not, but given that we now understand disease cycles, it's not hard to discern what is the chief characteristic that makes the distinction. The animals that are clean are those that are exclusively vegetarian, that they only eat pastures. Similarly, the birds that are clean are those that only eat the grain. And the fish that are clean are those who swim in the ocean, but not the things that crawl on the bottom, cleaning up the debris. And so it is with the With the insects, the grasshopper in all its varieties is clean because it consumes the grass. But those things that would eat other things, not just vegetation matter, are unclean. And we understand these things today. Modern man, in his wisdom, has started feeding processed animal offal to livestock and brought serious disease into the livestock because God designed them simply to eat the pasture. It seems fairly obvious that before the flood, God had given instructions to Adam and Eve that they were to be vegetarian, that they were to eat fruit, leaves, grain, plant life that God had given. The animals were their friends and companions, and they were used for sacrifice, fibre and skins for clothing, but they were not to be eaten. But the world environment after the flood was not as congenial to life. It was a tougher environment, and God permitted Noah and has permitted people to eat everything except the blood of an animal. Nevertheless, to eat some of these things on a regular basis has an increased risk of disease, and because God wanted to especially bless the children of Israel, he gave them instructions of what they could eat, which would be most healthy for them. The vegetarian animals, and insects and birds, and fish with scales that swim in the ocean. That is clean for them to eat. Nevertheless, there were also procedures in place to make sure that it was eaten fresh and not stale or old. And so the restriction comes down that they can eat the sheep, the cattle, and the goats, because these chew the cud and have cloven hooves. But we've already seen that they were not to eat the fat or the blood of these animals. This provided a simple rule by which the children of Israel could identify those things that they could eat. There was a simple rule by which they could identify the fish, those that swam, that had fins or scales. And of the birds, the Lord listed those that were carrion eaters, those that God provided to clean up the environment, to eat the flesh of animals that died, were not to be eaten by the people. And similarly with the insects that God provided. Now, the consequence of following these instructions is that in this way, God gives extended life to his people. So the children of Israel would live healthier and longer lives by following these dietary rules, a life that they could achieve more. The book of Proverbs emphasizes the fact that those who live godly lives will have an extended lifestyle. There's no particular time period given for any individual because there are a whole lot of circumstances that affect how long we might live. But when we walk in God's way, we can be sure that we will live longer and healthier and happier than if we ignore God's way. And while Christians are not required to live by these requirements given to the Jewish nation, that doesn't mean that we cannot learn from these instructions. Any people who live by these standards will benefit from them. But Christians live in all cultures and societies under all kinds of circumstances, and so it's not reasonable that God made rules about these things which his people would not be able to fulfill. The problem that was introduced, though, was that the Jewish people became proud, thinking that these things were merit in themselves. There's no merit in these things themselves. It's just part of that simple principle that if you live a clean life, then you avoid sickness and disease. And if you choose an unclean life, then you will suffer sickness and disease. So these instructions are there not to make the children of Israel quaint, but to be a blessing to them.